everyone. Good evening. I am really thrilled to introduce our speaker, Jim Doten, today. Jim is a licensed professional geologist with 36 years of experience in the environmental field. In addition to his undergraduate degree in geology, Jim has a master's of business administration and a master of science in environmental policy and management. He has over 20 years of environmental consulting experience and has been with the Minneapolis Health Department for the past 12 years. And so tonight, Jim is going to entertain us about the Carbon Sequestration Program and the Minneapolis Biochar program. So a little intro about what that is, and then I'll kick it over to Jim. But the Minneapolis Carbon Sequestration Program uses carbon negative actions to remove and sequester carbon. This is done through biochar, a special type of charcoal made by heating waste biomass in the absence of oxygen, which turns wood waste into biochar. The city uses biochar as a valuable soil amendment to turn our infrastructure into carbon sinks. So Jim, thank you so much for joining us, and take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much, Natalie. I appreciate the invitation. Hope you get something out of this. I'm going to give our presentation. Please save the questions for the end. Be glad to go through them at that time, just to make sure we get the flow going on here. So with this, I'm going to try screen sharing here. We got a couple edits along the way, and I get the Cool Soils program. That's kind of a cheesy tagline that came up for this, because you got to find something to fit on the bumper sticker. We had the conversation earlier, but this is the Minnesota Biochar Initiative. And what we're trying to do is take care of the planet, as you all know, but we're realizing it isn't enough to slow down speeding towards a cliff. We not only have to stop, but we have to back up. So what we're doing here is actually going past carbon neutral and into carbon negative. So that's what we're trying to do with the Cool Soils program. And as we talked about here before, the climate actions, there's two different types. And I know that this is a 101 type of training for your education information, but there is climate mitigation and climate adaptation. And adaptation is where a lot of what the health department has been working along in helping people get ready for a changing environment, and particularly those populations that are most at risk for adverse effects from the climate change, whether it be urban heat island effect, flooding, etc. Mitigation, so that's the other part of it. In almost all of our activities, including at the city, have been working on reducing carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. And when I was out in Sweden, I'll get into that in a little bit, I was talking to someone in Stockholm about this and their own biochar work, and they had what the guy had to say was that it isn't enough if you want to reach carbon neutral, you got to have a carbon negative component to it. But also, a lot of you have probably heard Project Drawdown, where we're working on ways to actually pull down carbon levels to try to reverse the effects or slow down the positive feedback loops. Minneapolis has been quite active. We have declared climate change an emergency, public health emergency, and have been working towards it. We are trying to get to carbon neutral by 2030, or actually by 2050, excuse me. And these are some of the actions that we've had. We have a unique opportunity with a relationship with Xcel Energy and Centerpoint in the Clean Energy Partnership. And this is one of the first ones in the country. Well, it is the first one in the country where we're working with the utilities to try to achieve carbon neutrality. We have our climate action plan in place, and those are what you see are the goals. And this is from a 2006 baseline that we're trying to reduce these emissions by. We're currently revising that this year, and we're turning this into a climate equity plan, which is doing more, not only looking at the climate aspects of it, but also how do we put an equity lens and protect our most vulnerable citizens. And the one good thing that I like is, I had an MBA, is that trying to understand and get things into understandable terms. What we're realizing is that these emissions reductions from a baseline are very difficult to track and hard to understand. So what we're looking at now is changing it into carbon budget, which is how many tons of carbon do we have within that we can spend before we've used up our part of the budget or allocated share. And we're realizing we need to take more extreme action in order to stay within our carbon budget. And we'll get into it, but biochar is one of the ways that we can actually put change back in the penny drawer, penny thing for our carbon budget, putting some capacity back. So this is energy benchmarking is another one. We found out that the Hall of Shame works very well. People come out and report their building energy use and comparing it through the Energy Star through the EPA. And we found out that other places as well, that comparing energy use causes people to go, oh, I have to challenge myself and move more. And a lot of being in the Midwest, a large part of our energy emissions are dealing with heating and cooling buildings. Urban forestry is one of those things, and we just started a new tree program and a tree coordinator position starting this year. She actually just got hired. She used to work for me. And we're doing a lot more for urban forestry, and that can not only help sequester carbon directly, but it helps with urban heat island effect, stormwater, all sorts of neat things. A few years ago, we passed a regenerative agriculture and biochar amendment or a resolution that's increasing ways to rebuild soil, climate resilience hubs. But you can see all of these things. And the last one, I understand Isaac Evans. He works on our green cost share program, which has a lot to do with energy efficiency projects and helping folks do better. What I work on since June now is my position. I am the Carbon Sequestration Program Manager. And everybody here has heard about carbon sequestration. If you live under a rock, maybe you haven't. But it's been a lot more in the news now, and not just getting hinted. It's kind of neat to see that we're actually looking at more at carbon removal as opposed to just slowing down the bus getting towards a cliff. But there are three types of carbon sequestration, and that's biological. And we know most of that is as far as the trees go, they're great collectors of carbon. Geological, and I'm glad as a geologist, I'm glad I spelled geological correctly. But that's looking at putting it into the ground in some way, shape, or form, whether it be in reservoirs, carbonates, etc. The last one is technical, and this is a lot what you see the billionaires now, Gates, etc., putting up large plants to try to put a technological fix on this to collect carbon, transport it, and store it primarily in the ground through geological functions. And they're all well and good. Minneapolis, we don't have the ability to put giant gas suckers up there, and just can't afford it. So this is what we work on, is biological carbon sequestration. And we have Minneapolis and Minnesota is well blessed with a lot of trees, constantly absorbing more carbon dioxide and storing it as well during the summertime, not so much during the winter. But trees are great nature's collection. There's only one problem, is that the storage is temporary at best. And they're great. If you've heard, I'm sure you've heard of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they're saying if you're taking an action regarding carbon, if you aren't doing it for at least 100 years, it isn't worth it. So you have to have a long-term horizon, because that's how we need to do, how long we have to work on to put carbon away to make a difference. And trees are great collectors, but as you can see that from the previous picture here, you notice that's the same avenue. That's not fall. That's emerald ash borer that came through and devastated that within a 2-year period from Toledo. So that's moving its way through there. But we've had the tornado come through North Minneapolis back in 2011 or 12. I wasn't here in 11. We had the tornado come through about 10 years ago. Disease, emerald ash borer, the invasive species, of course, development. comes on down to destroy things, and climate stress is another one. As we come through the heat, a lot of the trees we planted aren't used to these zones, and as the climate zones change, you have a hard time with the trees, keeping them alive. And in an urban environment, it's just hard to keep a tree going anyways. Very difficult business. And as I mentioned, this is our big reversal. You may not know, but there are almost 1,998,000,000 ash trees in Minnesota, and that's almost as many people as are in Minnesota. That joke never goes. We don't have 1 billion people in here. But the bottom line is that we have about the biggest ash population in the country, in the lower 48 here. And north we have a lot, but in the cities, of course, everybody remembers, or most, just taking a look at the average age here, I should say, a lot of us remember the Dutch elm disease and what the trees used to look like, the avenues used to look like, boulevards. Now that's devastated, and we've replaced with ash trees. Well, guess what? Emerald ash borers come on through, and it's here. We've had some cold winters that have slowed it down, but it's here. And without expensive interventions, our ash trees are going to be devastated. And the point is on this one is that the cities, or the state, had a very finely tuned balance between what to do with waste wood, whether it goes to the St. Paul district heating system, into mulch, composting, etc. And with this reversal over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to grossly exceed the capacity of the existing system to handle all that ash. And what that means is that a lot of it's going to be burned, a lot of it's going to be destroyed, and that's reversing that all that carbon that's been stored in the bank is going right back up into the atmosphere. And little trees take a while to turn into big trees, and little trees don't gather near as much carbon as big trees do. So a huge calamitous reversal in our carbon storage in Minnesota. What is one of the solutions? There's never any, we've learned over time that there's no such thing as a silver bullet solution, but there's a lot of silver arrows we can pull out, or tools, hammers, whatever they are. We have a lot of different tools, and it takes a system to take a look at how to address these issues. Biochar is one of the issues that I've been working on. We'll get into it, but biochar, it's carbon negative, but it's charcoal, it is charcoal, but it's made in a special type of charcoal, made in a special way, and can be used as a beneficial soil amendment as well as a filter media. It's carbon negative and actually turns the clock back for us. You make it by heating biomass to a high temperature in a low to no oxygen environment. And you can use other things. You can use grasses or herbaceous material, wood, biosolids. A number of materials can be made into biochar. But if you're looking at climate change and making the best amendments, wood is the best way to go. It's the one that's going to give you the recalcitrant carbon that has the lasting for millennia, and can actually make a difference in climate change. It's composed of high levels of stable mineralized carbon. What we're doing is working with the Natural Resource Research Institute at the University of Minnesota Duluth. And one of the chemists up there is like, hey, I work on wood chemistry, changing wood chemistry. And that's a good way to think about it. We're taking the chemistry of the wood and altering it into a stable form. And that's also reactive in the soil. This is typical. The average, your result may vary. But biochar can sequester about 2.5 times its weight in carbon dioxide. And depending on the temperature, it can be anywhere from 1.75 to 3 times its weight. And once you start looking at that, from 1 ton of biochar equaling approximately 3 tons of carbon dioxide, it gets to be significant. It's that multiplier that kind of amazes people. In the biochar cycle, like I said, we're looking at biological sequestration, with the trees being great collectors. And this is also, it's been in a finely tuned balance for a long time, in that trees take carbon dioxide, suck it up, and they also help pump carbon dioxide into the ground as well as in their stem. However, when they die, it decomposes, or using different routes, it cycles right back up. 97, 98% of that carbon goes right back into the atmosphere. What we're doing here is basically, if you ever seen that show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, at some point you can bank your winnings. And that's what we're doing with our carbon winnings from the trees, is banking that and putting it away. And we're on a typical tree for a typical application, we're saving about 50% of the carbon in the tree. So that's pretty significant. There are parts that we'll get into how it's made. There are parts that get up and are used in the production of biochar, so it isn't a complete save, but 50% beats 100%. And on top of the biochar, it is also can provide a substitute for fossil energy in producing either heat, electricity, steam, other forms, and reduce the amount of carbon that goes back into the atmosphere from both offsets and the char itself. Biochar is produced in not a vacuum, but close to it, but in a closed system where you have little to no oxygen. And as it says, you can see here from the left side of your screen is that hopefully it's your left, looks it's on mine, is that you can have wood or like corn stove or other things. The one on the bottom is a lot of people have been using coconut husks, rice hulls, oat, etc. Heating that up, and it produces biochar and can also produce syngas and biodiesel, depending on how you come on out. And while you're doing that, you can produce energy, say electricity or other forms of energy, and it's best to use biochar production along the way. The IPCC, by the way, and we mentioned before, recognize as of 2018, finally got their stuff together, recognize biochar as one of the 7 technologies that can carbon negative technologies that actually can work on reversing levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And if you observed, like I said, I saw some heads nod on drawdown. It's number 77 on drawdown. And actually there is a math error in the book that grossly underestimates the amount of carbon solved. It's probably done by the same people that missed Mars with their probe a few years ago when it turned out English and metric makes a difference. But there was a math error, so it's actually quite a bit higher than published. And it took a while to catch that error, but it's probably by about 2/3. In our history, like I said, how did the city get into biochar? It's an interesting story. It's one of my favorite topics because it's me. But in 2012, I was actually deployed to Afghanistan as part of an agribusiness development team, and I was a hydrologist. I was a hydrogeologist, but they figured sounds close enough to hydrologist, so you're now a hydrologist, go forth. All right. Well, they didn't know what to do with me, so I'm off by myself. It's about every other day going out to the villages and taking a look, and the soils there were horrible. We were in the poorest province and the 3rd poorest country in the world. And that's a big reason why Taliban was very prevalent where we were at, because it was the economic way to alternative. You have to do something to eat. Couldn't grow a lot of food. Well, I was working on the water. It isn't so much, there is problems with the water aspect, but a big part is the soil is very unproductive. It's spent, and the base construction of the soil, or how it was created, caused a problem. There's not a lot of organic carbon in the soil, and so the low cation exchange capacity, low water holding capacity, hard to cycle nutrients. We had corn that would grow about this high at the end of the season. It just amazingly poor, and we're trying to help them out if they can recover the economic base to help with security. So one of the things I am doing is I set up a soils lab, looked at the soils, and found the base problem. Well, our agronomist didn't like getting shot at, so he didn't go out, so he wasn't much help. But found that it's the carbon, and so that's why I found biochar as a means for helping rebuild the soils in Afghanistan. So started that program up and handed that off to the people that followed up with us after I left Afghanistan and came back to the city. To happen to be there, like, hey, this is kind of a neat idea. I was working on bees and biochar, so let's put bees on City Hall and kind of kick the biochar around. And I've been experimenting with it, getting biochar and working on different applications. And actually, that's 2013. I should have changed that. We signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with the Shakopee, Metawakan, and Sioux community, who happens to be the largest composter in the state. And so we have an agreement. So I get biochar, mix it with their compost, and then we work back with different community groups. I was in the health department, so primarily with the American Indian community or urban Indian community in the city, but other disadvantaged community groups as well in the poor neighborhoods, working on providing biochar and compost with their community gardens and their applications, and particularly with the urban Indian community, working on restoring pre-contact seed lines to grow their native diet and using their native traditions and helping rebuild their sense of what it means to be Indian or to be a native, and work on some cultural healing, which is really hard because you're saying, hey, we're from the government and I'm here to help you, doesn't go very far. So having the Shakopee, Metawakan, and Sioux community help me out and do introductions was huge. But that took us a long ways, and we got started working with the Meshkiki Gitagan, which is a native garden planting along in the Phillips neighborhood, and then with Little Earth Housing Development and others. And then eventually you start working with the park board and looking at doing this with trees, bare root tree stock. How can we make the trees reduce mortality, increase growth? So work with the university and park board on about 400 different trees around the city and seeing how they're responding. That's a 5-year study. It's doing really well. To the Chicago lot, we built that one up. It's first ground up biochar garden along Chicago Avenue, about 24th Street. And it's doing great. That's the picture at the bottom. That is now, it's the output has been great. And one of the things we're doing is growing food to provide to families that have been impacted by lead poisoning. So one of the major things, if children are at risk because of poor nutrition and particularly low iron, their bodies will suck up lead as a substitute and increase their chances. So we're looking at ways to increase lead or not lead production, but getting better ways to increase the resilience of children in those neighborhoods by providing these type of foods. And also one of the other studies I'm doing with the University of Minnesota is looking at the lead in the soil and ways we can reduce the bioavailability of lead using biochar to change the mineral structure of the lead so that it just passes through the system without being absorbed. So more to come on that. We've worked in 2019, Bloomberg found out that we were doing biochar. We're very amazed that any city in the country, US, even knew what biochar was, let alone working with it. So we got invited to go with myself, the head of public works, and one of our council members to Stockholm, where Bloomberg had funded through a mayor's grant, had funded biochar production in Stockholm, and we're using that. So great opportunity. At the same time, I was work with MnDOT and Hennepin County to redo a large part of Hiawatha Avenue, replacing the soils there, increasing infiltration, putting in swales, and growing pollinator corridors to increase native pollinator connections throughout the communities. Doing very well on that. More recently, we put it into our 2040 comprehensive plan. 2021, we received a grant from the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, so I've been working with Helsinki, Stockholm, Boulder, and Minneapolis on developing municipal use of biochar and how to, and developing standards with them. We published our study last summer. And 2022, this past year, we received a grant from Bloomberg Philanthropies to do our own production and also put it into our climate equity plan. So that's why I've got my job now, is I'm in the process of setting up our own biochar production to address climate change and build climate resilient communities. Here's another picture of the garden lot. But I got to move this little bar so I can see what it actually says up here. But we're looking at, it says we're going beyond carbon emissions reduction into going into carbon negative, and been able to put capacity back into our carbon budget. That's through being funded through a grant and matching funds from through Bloomberg Philanthropies. We have feedstock agreements with Xcel Energy for wood waste from their line maintenance. I'm in the process right now of putting a bid out for a pyrolysis unit. Hope to hear back in the next couple of weeks. We're looking at a production site down by the university at this time. I've been working on different uses for biochar around here, including urban agriculture, forestry, stormwater, green infrastructure, and we're looking at getting into surface water infiltration and potential for building components such as asphalt and concrete. Most of our work has been with biochar and compost mix. You know, we always say it's like chocolate and peanut butter. They're great separate, better together. Very synergistic effect. Most of our soil health applications are addressing soil health using biochar and compost. One of the ways that we're looking at funding this, we want to make it revenue neutral for the city so that the taxpayers aren't on the hook. One of the things we're doing is setting up sales agreement, offtake agreement for biochar with different users. And we're doing donations for climate equity work within the green zones, environmental justice areas. But also we're developing carbon removal credits, which are documenting and verifying the carbon removal, the carbon negative aspect of it, and using that to help fund the city operations. With three goals, through our Bloomberg grant, our local production, climate equity, so working with the environmental justice community, and being a regional resource for biochar in the Minneapolis or the metropolitan area, not just Minneapolis. And there we go. So these are some of the uses we've done. That's the urban forest or the forestry work we're doing with the park board up on top, the Chicago lot, and then Hiawatha Avenue. And these are some of the projects that we have been working on and what we will be working on in the future. Said we mentioned it was when we first started mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and is recognized by IPCC as carbon negative, and that's what we're using to create carbon sinks. It's not only the carbon sequestration directly from the biochar that's in there, but we're creating additional carbon through increased plant yields. You'll see 30% or better increase in yields from gardens, etc. But also the trees and other ones, and the increased root system you put on in, it's pulling carbon out of the air and pushing it into the ground in the form of carbohydrates and restoring the soil microbial system, so including the microbes and the mycorrhizal fungi. So we're really looking at building that up, and that from there, it's building that stable carbon form, the humus that is so important to soil health, carbon, or for building soil tilth, restoring aggregate formations, increasing infiltration, cation exchange capacity, and water holding capacity. So that way, the water holding capacity and the cation exchange capacity, we're helping make the city soils drought resistant. So we're increasing reducing food insecurity, and we've demonstrated that through Little Earth and other applications where we're building climate resilience as part of adaptation, climate adaptation. So we're also, by boosting the plant production and evapotranspiration has a direct effect on heat island. We're reducing the amount of excess stormwater and boosting our tree canopy. We had just mentioned the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. These are some of the products, and we came out to the biochar playbook and the urban forest strategy, biochar urban forest strategy. Both of those can be found on the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance program. That was quite a great opportunity to work with Stockholm and Helsinki and Boulder on that aspect. these are some of the partners we've been working with, currently on 2 technical advisory panels for different studies with MnDOT and the University of Maryland, as well as Natural Resource Research Institute in Detroit and Duluth, for helping develop specifications and standards to really open up the use of biochar along our transportation corridors and build that green infrastructure. The Pollution Control Agency has been supportive of our programming has very minimal air pollution effects, so to speak, because we have a very controlled use of the volatiles coming off of the wood. The University of Minnesota, we have a number of research projects along with the University of Minnesota and the Natural Resource Research Institute. Hennepin County and Dakota County have been doing work with them as well, looking at transportation corridors, parks, urban forestry, and others. Mentioned SMSC, hoping to take an off-take agreement with them, as well as SCT down in Rosemont, for using this with their biochar to make it available for the public. And also, once we put this on in, it helps us build those carbon credits for sale. We're working with Environmental Initiative, which is the an organization between private and public sectors in dealing with larger environmental issues across the area, and Excel Energy. So we have a memorandum of understanding for working with them on using their wood waste. Instead of just burning it for energy in St. Paul, we're going to be turning it into biochar, which is a better win for the environment as far as reducing carbon footprint. And this is just my contact information here. Anybody feel free to reach out, and I'll be glad to talk to you at any time. That's the end of the formal part of the program here. And I'm curious to see, does anybody have any questions?
Jim, I can start with one while people get ready.
Sure.
Where does the heat come from for burning the wood? Would you burn more wood, or what do you use, and how does that energy compare with natural emissions?
That's kind of one of the neat aspects, and I can go back to the right screen here. Well, I'm not sharing anymore, but if you looked at the biochar, the pyrolyzer, what you do is the wood goes into that container there. We're looking at a continuous process, so it'll be constantly moving through. You can do it in batch or continuous. You have to initially heat the wood up, and it's usually done with propane, or in our case, we're looking at the unit we're looking at be another form of wood that's using to heat the container. Once you do that, in the absence of the oxygen, normally the wood would start burning. As the gases come off, or initially you have the volatiles and water vapor coming off, and then the volatiles. The volatiles, so those gases, as they come off, they're not combusting. So you take them out, draw them around, and burn them in a controlled fashion outside the vessel. So it's self-driving. That's where you end up with your carbon loss, is that the volatiles will come off and come around and heat the vessel. And this is why wood is the best thing to char, is that it has a higher lignin content. And the lignin is where you end up getting the carbon for the sequestration, and it's the carbon form that it's in. It's organic compounds. So looking at it, benzene ring basically through there. We're disassembling those things and getting them reassemble into very large stable forms, and that interacts with the soil. And that's where you go from something that's going to last a couple of years in nature to something that'll last 1,000 or 2,000 years. So we use the cellulose and hemicellulose to drive the process, heat it up, and then change the form of the lignin. And that's where we really get our stable or our recalcitrant carbon from, is changing that wood chemistry. But it's so it's just capturing and having a better combustion outside of the vessel, and not having combustion nearby, so you preserve the carbon and not burn it off.
So your actual energy use is minimal then, huh?
What's that?
Your actual energy use is very minimal?
No, the energy use itself to kickstart it, but the thing is too, is there's a lot of waste heat that comes off of the system, And the key for us then is how do you harness that waste heat? Don't waste it. So whether it be heating a building, electrical generation, steam generation, Stockholm uses theirs for their central heating district. We're looking at different options. One of the things we were originally looking at was an aquathermal energy storage system to help, to help boost the geothermal system, a big geothermal battery. But we are looking at other alternatives for the use of the waste heat in order to really make it a lot more efficient and displace other greenhouse gases or other fossil fuels. Sorry, Hobie, did you have a question there?
Yes, thank you. This is fascinating, Jim. I had one question about a comment you made early on. I know carbon dioxide lasts a long time in the atmosphere. And you said something about we need to take carbon out of the air or, and sequester it for a long period of time. Biochar does that. It's a question for you and maybe for anybody else here. I'd understood that trees were a short-term solution that would buy us some time, perhaps, in order to scale up biochar, for example. And I just wondered if you had a thought on that.
Exactly. And that's one of the points I had on there is talking about trees are great collectors and storers of carbon, but it's temporary. And reversible. And what we're doing is taking that, they make great collectors. And what we're doing is allowing the trees to collect that. And instead of allowing it to go back up, cycle up, we're cutting that cycle off, changing the form of that carbon and putting it into long-term sequestration. So we're taking advantage of the tree's ability to collect.
And I had another sort of a comment. You mentioned microrhizomes and fungi and that sort of thing. There's a fabulous TED talk by a guy named Colin Averill, I think, on doubling the rate of tree growth with using the right kind of fungi in the process. And I'll put it in the chat if you're interested, because it's a soil it's a soil thing too.
That's the one of the they're referring to one of the types of mycorrhizal fungi. And this has been demonstrated to increase both microbial activity as well as microfungal activity. And what we're seeing is used to be thought that but leaf litter, etc., was the way you rebuilt the soil carbon. It breaks down and then magically gets complex, breaks down into simple molecules, and all of a sudden it's complex again. Well, it kind of goes against thermodynamics, but what they found out is that in order to really build that stable soil component, the humus that really makes soil functional, that's a component of the microbes. And what biochar does through a lot of different mechanisms, you can get into that discussion another time. It gets overly complex. But biochar really boosts microbial activity and mycorrhizal fungi in the soil, and primarily is acting as a source of electrons, either moving them around, or it can feed both sides of a redox reaction, charging up and charging down. So it really builds those activities, and that getting a functioning soil back, and that encourages the plants to stimulate carbohydrate production, etc. And it's their breakdown of metabolites that really form that stable form of fungi, of soil carbon, the humus. And so it's a paradigm shift that we thought over the last 150 years. And it's the biochar used to be thought of as just a recalcitrant lump of carbon sitting in the soil. No, it's really a battery, soil battery. It's like, you put the battery in there and now the flashlight works. And that's one of the components that's been missing and misunderstood, is underestimating or not understanding the way that the recalcitrant carbon informs of like biochar have on the soil health and the activities, the geobiological biochemical reactions in the soil. Anna?
Yeah, thanks. This is so interesting, and I can't believe we in Minneapolis, we in Minnesota don't all know about what you're doing. I feel like you need a better PR person.
We're working on that.
But hey, it's just kind of a silly question, but I'm wondering if the city sells carbon credits for what they're doing, does that mean that we can't then also claim it like on the city's like
Well,
doing
that's,
good balance sheet? Like, are we double counting then?
no, that's a good point, and that's a discussion. And it's kind of funny, we've brought that up ourselves, is that, I'm saying right now that we're looking at developing and selling those credits in order to help finance it. And these are you can't go forward, and we'll see what actually happens, the sausage making that goes on behind the scenes. But that's one of the discussions we're having off screen then, is that, okay, we can either do this or we can take credit for it ourselves. What do you want, how are the optics, and what do you want to make it look like? So I can say this now. The other one is a good chance that'll happen. And you're right, you can't double count it. You either keep it or you sell it. You can't count it twice. But right now, as I put that down there, so they see the value, that there is value to it. And then once they come down to it and start looking at it, it becomes real. Then I think there's a good chance that we'll just be acknowledging it, but at least developing the credits so that you take into account all the externalities and the actual life cycle assessment and the footprint of what you're doing to really prove that it is truly carbon negative and not just a wash. And that's what we're working on right now in very conservative means. So I would not be surprised if the city does end it up, because like I said, this is a way that we can put it back into build capacity back into our own carbon budget. So once they see that actually quantified, I think there's a greater chance that we'll actually keep it at that point. It just has to be real for people and politicians in general, particularly to understand it. So that's a really good point, Anna. Tim.
Yeah, do you see this ramping up in Minneapolis, or?
Yeah, that's I'm working on right now. I'm hoping to work on site development and have my machine delivered late summer, and really kicking the system out this fall. I'm working with hopefully I'm going to be getting a postdoc through the University of Minnesota and working with some researchers up in Duluth to help fine tune and calibrate our systems, and we're getting it done so that we're producing a good product. And I'm already working on the delivery systems and such like that. So we're looking at ramping it up to what we can do, but this is a regional asset. We don't want to be shipping a lot of wood waste all over the state to one location. So I'm talking to other agencies, Pollution Control Agency, DOT, and DNR, looking at establishing similar systems around the state so that we can decentralize production and have it closer to where we're at, where it's needed. But we're really trying to develop up and demonstrate the use and how to use it, because a lot of people now, you hear about it, they think it's great, but it has to be available. And it's a chicken and the egg thing. And it hasn't been available here. If I hadn't accidentally run across it in Afghanistan, I'd still be blindly walking through the world not knowing about it. It's really growing in awareness. It's gone exponential. Since even when I started it, the interest in it had been around for since the 60s as far as knowing about it, but it literally has been ramping up over the past 10 years, and especially now it's going exponential. It's being taught in schools now where it wasn't before. You can get a PhD in biochar now. Used to be that it was just an interesting topic, but just working through, but it's really becoming mainstreamed now, and we're at the leading edge in Minnesota based on our work over the past 10 years. And so it's nice to be seen on a municipal level. We are seen as the leader nationwide in Minneapolis, and that's pretty cool in my book. Janet.
You mentioned biochar and water programs.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, a couple of different ways. Number one, I'm looking at it as far as green infrastructure and stormwater, working on infiltration potentially, holding it in the soil, absorbing it, and then holding it for plants to use and evapotranspiration back out. But one of the other applications, in fact, next Thursday, they're having a talk down at the Hydro Lab on over by in the Mississippi there. with the University of Minnesota. Bridget Ulrich from NRI, Natural Resource Research Institute, has given a talk on that. She did her PhD on removal of contaminants. There's a demonstration in Webb Park for what's called an iron sand filter along the creek there, and that includes biochar in it, and it's removing the E. coli from the waterway. And the iron sand filter is taking care of the phosphorus, but it also takes care of nitrates and other things. We're exploring it right now in looking at PFAS, the perfluoroalkyl substances, and been able to do it. And there's one thing I haven't said, I normally say 100 times, is that biochar is not the same. It all depends on feedstock, temperature, and particle size. And so it can do a number of things, but one char can't do it all. And so that's one of the aspects I'm looking at with the process I'm looking at, is been able to vary the temperature and the feeds and basically the temperature in the feedstock types of wood that are coming through there to develop it up, whether we're looking at soil health, contaminant removals, is it heavy metals we're looking at, is it pathogens like E. coli, organic compounds like pesticides or PFAS. It all takes different types of chars, and that's one of the things that grant from that we received with NRI and MnDOT is looking at, is developing those standards for what type of char can remove what type of contaminant. And it's also being looked at with remediation for brownfield sites, et cetera, to help take, say, heavy metals, absorb it from the soils and hold on to it so it can't be used, and reduce the toxicity of the soils. So that's some of the things we're looking at. Tim, you have another?
Yeah, we just got a couple minutes left here, so I'll make it short. Do you have a separate step where you pulverize the biochar, and how does it affect the acidity of the soil?
Yeah, no, those are good questions, both good questions. We are looking at potentially ways to pulverize it, but I like it as a chunk, to be honest with you. And one of the reasons is it will lower in size as it goes along. But if you get it too fine too soon, it becomes mobile. And can get, it doesn't, like, it blows away, but you go through, unless it's bound up with the soil, it'll start moving, or it'll move around in the environment. It'll still be there, just not where you want it to be. And that's an area that of exploration that we are still looking at as a field. But the stuff we're used to and working with is more of a chunk style, less than quarter inch or a half inch, but it stays where it's at, and it will break down over time as far as getting smaller. But I want it to stay where it's at and immobile for the time. It does have a liming effect in that it will raise pH. If you have an acidic soil, this will turn it more basic. If you have a very basic soil, you may not see as good of effect because, alkaline soils won't work as well. Works great in acidic soils. Our pH around the cities is pretty much 6.5 to just over 7. And it doesn't matter where you go, that's what it is. And we haven't seen in normal applications a significant change in pH. It is a good buffer material if you're looking at it in order to help keep, if you have acidic soils, to keep it basic. And they've done a lot of work in Finland with that, with the marshy soils that they have there, and dramatic results in acidifying or neutralizing the soil. So, but it does have an effect on pH. And for the most part, so these are some topics out west. You might have some problems in using this because you already have alkaline soils. But here, where it's basic to a slightly acidic, it works just fine. And you won't see a dramatic change in the swing in the pH like it was originally afraid of. Mark, you were next.
Yes, Jim, you mentioned the hope to have decentralized production of biochar. Yeah. Can you give us a sense of what the equipment costs are as different locations are considering this?
What I'm looking at here is probably being able to produce a couple thousand tons of biochar a year. The cost on this project here, the best estimate is about 1.2 million. That's between equipment and site development, et cetera. And so that would be about the size of what you'd want for a regional facility. Say Minneapolis, Rochester, Duluth, St. Cloud is right around that ballpark would be a good estimate.
Thank you.
Yep, Dan.
Yeah, so my question is similar. So I work at Accenture, and I'm working with three major. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm working with three major paper pulp type companies, and they're all asking what they can do with their treetops, right? So they harvest wood, and they've got treetops, and one of the options they're asking us about is biochar. So this is very topical for me. The last question was part of what I wanted to ask is this equipment that you install, is it commercial equipment, pre-manufactured, pre-made, or is it bespoke, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's commercial equipment, and it's not big enough that there's smaller systems you can get, more backyard type of things that are off the shelf or small scale. What we're looking at here is a mid-size. You can go all the way up to industrial size facility, very large facilities. But the range that we're looking for, they don't make them until you order them. They're just too expensive and not enough orders to keep them on the shelf. So when you order one, they make it, and it takes about 2 months to make it. And as far as treetops, the woody part is easy to use. It's the green part that gets to be a problem. And it's based on the chemistry, and because one of Tim's question on soil pH is that you get the green material in there or grassy material, you have higher ash content, and that's where you end up with your higher pHs, and that in a lot more effect on soil lining, etc. And the ash content affects the quality as well. And also it has a higher percentage of cellulose and hemicellulose. No, the cellulose is really what the pulp companies are going for, but we're really looking for is the lignin. The cellulose provides the fuel to get the volatiles to drive the system, but it's really changed. The lignin is where we get it. That's our sweet spot for building a good char that's stable for 1,000 years or more.
Yeah, no, that's great, because these tree companies, they're right now getting about 70% of their energy from the parts of the trees they're not turning into paper. So they've already got that down, but they've got to get the other 30% out of their system. And some are looking at it as a carbon sequestration play. Some of it are looking as then they can sell it, and then it could be an extra income that they could then use to do other carbon sequestration things.
And we didn't get into it. What I'm working at is what's called slow pyrolysis, which is the emphasis is on biochar production with the secondary emphasis on energy production. There's other ones, fast pyrolysis or gasification, where the emphasis is on energy production, and you happen to get some biochar as a side result. And it's depending what emphasis you want to put on it. And the gasifiers, et cetera, the biochar you get is a very specific type, has less full utility, but it's still a good char for its application. But the emphasis there is on energy production versus char.
Okay. So I know we're at time. I took a screenshot of your contact information. Can I reach out to you tomorrow and maybe set up a coffee or lunch or something?
You bet. Be glad to.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Dan. All right. I don't see any other hands raised at the moment here. I know you all have some business you want to talk to, and sorry about hogging all the time here, Tim.
No, quite all right. That was one heck of a Q&A. That's it. Big round of applause for Jim, virtual or otherwise.
Thank you all.
Yeah, so just a couple of quick notes. I just want to call attention to Green Bank Initiative. We have a mention of it on the website. So take a look, and there's one extra little bit. You may be wondering, what the heck is a green bank, and how does it affect me? So this initiative has to do more with the legislation that's been put forth to establish a sort of a green bank authority in the state of Minnesota. So it's at the very early stages. And so what we will eventually need you folks to do, and chapter membership in general, is to contact your legislators about this and kind of read up on it and say, this is something we'd like to pursue. So again, I'll have more details for you coming up in the week with a little more information, but just want to point that out. The second thing is our Earth Day event on April 22nd. So we are working with Brenda Varda at the event at the Solar Arts Building. So it'll take place from 1 to 6 p.m. It's going to be live music and presentations from we got Minnesota State Senator John Hoffman, our own Steve Japs from the outreach team will be there as well. And so it'll be a good time. It's a main level is basically like the tap room and the brewery, but we're actually going to be on the second level, which is surrounded with art studios and whatnot. So music, presentations, discussions, all of that. So for God's sakes, join us. I think you'll have a good time. Let me hand it over to Tim. We have some new developments with action tracking. It's all yours, Tim.
Yeah, to wrap things up, we're a climate reality chapter. So our mission is to address climate change. And this would be anything you want. You could share what you know. You could electrify your home, attend this meeting, go on a climate march, many other actions. We like to acknowledge the work that you're doing, but we don't even know what you are doing. In the past, we could log on to Reality Hub, and they have these things called acts of leadership, and you could post them there, and we could see what everyone was doing. We get a sense of who was active, what their expertise was, what their connections and interests were. But about 2 years ago, Climate Reality recognized that we have a lot of mobile phone users, and so they had to change Reality Hub. The new Reality Hub has a lot of shortcomings. It doesn't do this very well. And so our chapter decided we're going to try to make our own action tracker. Now, if you look in the chat, I have the link to it. It was also discussed in the newsletter. Again, you don't have to do this, but I really appreciate it if you did. I'd like to know what you're up to. And we're going to, so let me step through it. So I'm going to share my screen. So if you can follow the link with me if you want, just do it at the same time. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to a Google form. Just 5 pieces of information. It wants to know your email address, wants to know the date that you did the action, and the type of activity. Those are described at the bottom. There's even others, so absolutely everything is covered. So let's say, put in tonight's event. We attended an event. How long did you spend? 1 hour. Description, CMC chapter meeting, March 2023. Then you just go down the bottom and hit submit. Now, Google automatically captures this information and puts it in the spreadsheet that looks like this. So you have who did it, when they did the action, the type it was, and we could post this on the website in the under members. It's password protected, so you can manipulate it in your spreadsheet and you can see what your friends and neighbors are up to. So I encourage you to give this a try, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And any questions about that you think it's even worth doing, I hope you do. We like to share it with other chapters if it works, and we don't even know who's giving presentations. We have no way of knowing anymore, and they ask us to report how many there were. So is anyone willing to give it a try tonight? Just go in there and type you attended a meeting. Just follow that link.
Yep, very easy. I just did it right now, so that's how easy it was.
I just did it for Clean Energy Business Day.
Okay,
I was just there for since noon today. That's why I was late.
Yep, you're showing up. Advocate, Clean Energy Business Day. Okay, good. So that's pretty much it. And Renee, I hear that you may be at that solar arts building thing too.
Yes, indeed. Going to be talking with Brenda about that on Saturday, doing some presentation and demonstrations about our local textile kind of system that we're working on here with Three Rivers Fiber Sheds. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So come and be sure to think about clothes and socks.
Okay, cool.
Alrighty. I guess, and Natalie, do you have anything about next month's featured speaker?
Yes. So I hope everyone was happy with this presentation. Jim, again, thanks so much. It was fantastic. So definitely looking forward to wrapping that up. And thanks for being an awesome supportive member as well. So April 20th is going to be our next presentation, and we are going to be having Moses join us from the public health specialist who is from the Health Department from the city of Minneapolis. And they are going to be speaking about building a healthy and equitable and local food system. And so the topic is really about, food insecurity can affect anyone, but it is disproportionately affects individuals and communities that hold marginalized identities. And so this presentation will examine food access inequities and how Homegrown Minneapolis has been working to facilitate conversations and coordinate action around building a healthy and equitable and local food system. So definitely looking forward to that presentation, and we hope you all can join us then.
Sounds good. All righty. Well, on behalf of the leadership team here at the Central Minnesota chapter of the Climate Reality Project, thanks for attending.